My therapist's receptionist gave my abusive ex my appointment times. Now he knows exactly when I'm vulnerable and alone. I saw Ethan's car in the parking lot before my Thursday afternoon therapy session, and my entire body went cold. Silver Audi, the one he bought after the promotion he celebrated by breaking 2 of my ribs. I'd been seeing Dr. Patel for 8 months, ever since the restraining order went through, and this office was supposed to be my safe space. The one place Ethan couldn't find me because I'd been so careful. I paid cash, used my mother's insurance, never posted about therapy online, and told only 3 people where I was going. I sat in my car for 10 minutes watching his vehicle, waiting to see if he'd get out, but he just sat there. Engine off, phone in his hand, occasionally looking up at the building entrance. When I finally gathered the courage to walk inside, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the door. The receptionist, Amanda, looked up from her desk with that same vacant smile she always gave everyone. I wanted to ask her how Ethan knew I was here, wanted to demand answers, but my appointment was starting and Dr. Patel was already opening her office door to call me in. The session was useless because I couldn't focus on anything except the knowledge that Ethan was outside waiting for me. Dr. Patel asked what was wrong, and I told her my ex was in the parking lot, that somehow he'd found out about my appointments. Her face changed immediately, going from concerned therapist to genuinely alarmed human being. She asked if I was sure it was him, and I described the car, the license plate I'd memorized during our 2 years together when I was still pretending everything was fine. Dr. Patel stood up and walked to her window, which overlooked the parking lot. She was quiet for a long moment before turning back to me and saying, "We needed to figure out how this happened." I told her I'd been so careful, that I'd only told my best friend Simone, my mother, and my lawyer about these appointments. Dr. Patel asked if any of those people would have told him, and I said absolutely not. My mother hated Ethan after seeing the hospital photos. Simone had helped me pack my things and move out in the middle of the night. My lawyer had fought for the restraining order. None of them would betray me. Dr. Patel called Amanda into the office and asked her directly if anyone had inquired about my appointments recently. Amanda looked confused at first, then defensive, saying she would never give out patient information. Dr. Patel pressed harder, asking if anyone had called asking about me specifically, or if anyone had tried to access the schedule. Amanda's face did something strange then, a flicker of recognition that she tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. She said there was a man who'd called last week asking about appointment availability for new patients. He'd asked specifically about Thursday afternoon slots and whether they were usually busy. Amanda had told him Thursdays were moderately booked, with appointments running from noon until 6. I felt my stomach drop because that was exactly when I came in, every Thursday at 4. Amanda's face went pale as she realized what she'd done. She started apologizing, saying she didn't know, that the man had seemed nice and was just asking general questions about scheduling. Dr. Patel's voice was sharp when she asked if Amanda had mentioned any patient names during that call. Amanda shook her head quickly, too quickly, and I knew she was lying. I asked Amanda what else she'd told him, and her eyes filled with tears. She said he'd asked if the practice treated trauma patients, and she'd mentioned that yes, they specialized in domestic violence recovery and PTSD. He'd asked how long typical treatment lasted, and she'd said most patients came weekly for 6 to 12 months. I stood up from my chair because I needed to move, needed to do something with the rage building in my chest. I asked Amanda if the man had given a name, and she said yes. He'd said his name was David, and that he was calling for his sister who needed help. I asked if David had mentioned me specifically, and Amanda looked at the floor. Dr. Patel asked again, firmer this time, and Amanda finally admitted that David had asked if someone named Claire was a patient there. "My name is Claire." Amanda had confirmed it. She'd told Ethan, who was obviously not named David, that I was a patient at this practice. Then she'd given him enough information to figure out when I'd likely be here, vulnerable and alone, walking to my car after spending an hour talking about the trauma he'd caused. Dr. Patel told Amanda to leave the office immediately, and that they'd discuss this further after my session. Amanda tried to apologize again, but Dr. Patel cut her off, saying the damage was done, and Amanda needed to understand the severity of what she'd done. After Amanda left, Dr. Patel sat down and asked if I felt safe leaving the building. I said no, obviously not. Ethan was sitting in the parking lot waiting for me. She pulled out her phone and called building security, explaining the situation and asking them to escort me to my car. Then she called the police. I told her not to bother because the police had been useless during my relationship with Ethan, and useless after. I'd called them 4 times while we were together. Twice they did nothing. Once they suggested couples counseling. The 4th time, they arrested Ethan, but he was out within hours and came home angrier than before. The restraining order was just paper. It meant nothing if he decided to violate it. Dr. Patel insisted on calling anyway, and within 20 minutes, 2 officers arrived. They took my statement about the restraining order and went outside to check if Ethan was still in the parking lot. He was gone by then, Probably saw the police car pull up and left. The officers took photos of where his car had been parked and filed a report for restraining order violation. But one of them told me honestly that unless Ethan made direct contact with me, there wasn't much they could do about him being in a public parking lot. I asked what I was supposed to do now, and the officer said I should vary my routine, consider changing therapy offices, maybe get a security system at home. All the things I'd already done. All the precautions that meant nothing, because Amanda had handed Ethan my schedule on a silver platter. Dr. Patel walked me out to my car with security and apologized repeatedly. She said Amanda would be terminated immediately, and that she was implementing new privacy protocols. I told her it was too late for protocols because Ethan already knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in my apartment, the one Ethan didn't know about because I'd rented it through a friend's name, and listened to every sound in the building. Every footstep in the hallway, every door closing, every car engine outside. I'd worked so hard to build a life where I felt safe, where I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. 8 months of therapy. 8 months of slowly learning to trust again. 8 months of building myself back into someone who wasn't afraid all the time. Amanda had destroyed that in one phone call. She'd handed my safety to the man who'd hospitalized me 3 times, who'd isolated me from my friends and family, who'd convinced me for 2 years that I deserved every hit because I was difficult and ungrateful and stupid. The man who'd promised to kill me if I ever left him. The restraining order had been in place for 10 months. Ethan had violated it twice, showing up at my workplace and once at Simone's apartment looking for me. Both times he'd been arrested and released the same day. The judge had warned him, but done nothing else. Friday morning, I called in sick to work because I couldn't function. I spent 3 hours on the phone with my lawyer, Gregory, who was furious about the receptionist's breach. He said we could potentially sue the therapy practice for the HIPAA violation, and that he'd send Amanda a cease and desist letter immediately. But more urgently, he wanted to file for an emergency protective order modification that would include the therapy office parking lot as a restricted zone. I told him that felt pointless when the regular restraining order was already being ignored. Gregory's voice was tired when he said he knew that the system was broken, but we had to work within it anyway. He also suggested I consider relocating again, maybe to a different city entirely. I started crying because I'd already relocated twice. I'd already given up my apartment, my job, my entire social circle once before. I'd built this new life carefully, and now I was supposed to abandon it again because Amanda couldn't keep her mouth shut during a phone call with someone claiming his name was David. Simone came over that night with wine and takeout and listened to me vent for 2 hours. She was angrier than I was, if that was possible, and wanted to drive to the therapy office and confront Amanda directly. I told her Amanda had probably already been fired, and that confronting her wouldn't change anything. Ethan knew where I was every Thursday at 4. He knew I was in therapy for trauma. He knew I was getting help recovering from what he'd done to me. That knowledge gave him power over me again, the kind of power I'd spent 8 months trying to take back. Simone asked if I'd heard from Ethan directly, and I said no. He was smart enough to not leave evidence. He'd just sit in parking lots, just be present in spaces where I was supposed to feel safe, just remind me that he could find me whenever he wanted. Psychological warfare without ever saying a word. Simone said I should get a gun. I told her I'd thought about it, but the idea of having a weapon in my apartment scared me more than Ethan did. What if he got it away from me? What if I hesitated to use it and he didn't? The next Thursday, I didn't go to therapy. I texted Dr. Patel that I needed a break, and she understood. She said she'd make herself available for emergency phone sessions if I needed them, and that Amanda had been terminated the day after the incident. The practice was reviewing all their privacy procedures and training staff on HIPAA compliance. None of that helped me. I spent Thursday afternoon at the library, in the back section where hardly anyone went, reading the same page of a book over and over because I couldn't concentrate. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I miss our Thursdays together. Hope you're doing well. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped my phone. It clattered on the library floor, and an elderly woman reading nearby looked over at me with concern. I picked up the phone and stared at the message. Ethan. It had to be Ethan. Who else would reference Thursdays? Who else would know I wasn't at therapy? I blocked the number immediately and called Gregory. He said to document everything, screenshot the message, note the date and time. Add it to the growing pile of evidence that meant nothing. That weekend, I barely left my apartment. I ordered groceries online and had them delivered. I kept all my curtains closed. I checked the locks on my door 17 times on Saturday night. Sunday morning, I woke up to find a note slid under my door. Plain white paper, printed text. You can't hide forever, Claire. I just want to talk. I called 911 and the responding officers took the note as evidence but said the same thing as before. No direct threat, no proof it was from Ethan, nothing they could do except file another report. One officer suggested I install a security camera in the hallway. The building manager said no cameras were allowed in common areas per the lease agreement. I was trapped between rules and systems that protected everyone except me. I called my mother and told her I was thinking about leaving the state. She cried and begged me not to go so far away, but said she'd support whatever I needed to do to stay safe. That night, I looked up apartments in Portland, in Seattle, in cities where I knew no one, and Ethan would never think to look. Monday morning, I went to work and tried to act normal. I was an accountant at a mid-sized firm, the kind of job where you could blend into the background and no one asked personal questions. My cubicle was in the middle of the floor, surrounded by other cubicles, and I felt relatively safe there during business hours. I'd told my supervisor, Nancy, about the restraining order, and she'd been supportive, even walking me to my car a few times in the early months. I made it until lunch before my hands started shaking again. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, breathing slowly, counting to 10 over and over. When I came out, Nancy was waiting by the sinks. She asked if I was okay, and I said yes, just stressed. She looked at me with those kind eyes that made me want to tell her everything, but I couldn't form the words. She said if I needed anything to let her know. I thanked her and went back to my desk. An email notification popped up from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line: Let's talk. I deleted it without opening it. That afternoon, I got 3 more emails from different addresses, all with similar subject lines. We need to talk. Just hear me out. I'm not the bad guy here. I blocked each one and felt my chest getting tighter with each deletion. Ethan was escalating. He'd found my work email, which wasn't hard since my company website listed all employees, but the frequency meant he was fixating again. That's what the domestic violence counselor had called it during the group sessions I'd attended before finding Dr. Patel. Fixation. When the abuser becomes obsessed with the victim who left, unable to accept the loss of control. The counselor had said fixation often preceded violence. I went to Nancy's office and told her I needed to leave early. She took one look at my face and said yes without asking questions. I gathered my things and practically ran to the parking garage. Ethan's silver Audi was parked 2 rows from my car. He was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, waiting. I froze in the stairwell doorway, my entire body going rigid with fear. Ethan saw me and smiled. That charming smile he'd used when we first met. The one that had made me think he was different from other guys. Safe. Kind. The smile that had hidden everything underneath until it was too late to leave without risking everything. He called my name and said he just wanted 5 minutes to talk. I turned around and ran back into the building, taking the elevator to Nancy's floor. I burst into her office without knocking and told her Ethan was in the parking garage. Nancy called building security immediately. By the time security got to the garage, Ethan was gone again. The security guard said they'd review camera footage and ban him from the property, but that public parking garages were hard to monitor. I sat in Nancy's office for an hour until my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. Nancy offered to have someone escort me home, but I said no. I couldn't let Ethan know where I lived. I'd drive to a public place first, make sure he wasn't following, then go home. The paranoia that had finally started to ease after 8 months of therapy came roaring back like it had never left. Gregory filed an emergency motion that night, and we had a hearing scheduled for Wednesday morning. The judge reviewed the evidence, the therapy office parking lot incident, the text message, the note under my door, the emails, the workplace parking garage confrontation. All of it documented, all of it undeniable. The judge modified the restraining order to increase the distance requirement from 100 yards to 500 yards and added specific locations where Ethan was prohibited from going: my workplace, the therapy office, my apartment building. The judge also warned Ethan, who attended the hearing with his own lawyer, that the next violation would result in jail time. Ethan's lawyer argued that his client was trying to have a conversation with his ex-girlfriend, and that showing up in public places wasn't a crime. The judge shut that down quickly, saying a restraining order meant no contact, period. But I could see Ethan's face during the hearing. He was angry. The kind of cold, controlled anger I'd learned to recognize during our relationship. The anger that preceded the worst nights. After the hearing, Ethan's lawyer approached Gregory in the hallway and suggested mediation. Said his client just wanted closure, and that maybe if I'd agree to one supervised conversation, Ethan would stop trying to contact me. Gregory told him absolutely not, and that if they tried to contact me again in any form, we'd pursue criminal charges. Ethan's lawyer handed Gregory a business card anyway, and said the offer stood. I watched this exchange from down the hallway, staying far enough away that Ethan couldn't approach me. He was staring at me, though. Not saying anything, just staring with that expression I couldn't read. When I got to my car, I found a rose under the windshield wiper. Red rose, no note. I left it there and took a photo before driving away. Added it to the evidence file. Called Gregory from the car. He said we were building a case, but that restraining order violations were rarely prosecuted aggressively unless serious violence occurred. I asked what constituted serious violence, and he went quiet. I knew the answer. Serious violence meant hospitalization or death. Anything less was just documentation. The next week was quiet, and that scared me more than the escalation had. Silence from Ethan meant he was planning something. I knew how he operated. He'd push, get slapped down by the system, retreat to regroup, then come back worse. I changed my phone number and only gave it to 5 people. I varied my routine, going to work at different times, taking different routes. I stopped going to my regular coffee shop, stopped going to the gym, stopped doing anything predictable. Dr. Patel offered to do phone sessions, and I accepted. Talking to her while walking around my apartment felt safer than sitting in her office. She said I was showing signs of hypervigilance and increased PTSD symptoms. I told her obviously my ex-boyfriend was stalking me after her receptionist gave him my schedule. She apologized again and said Amanda's termination had been reported to the licensing board and that there would be professional consequences. I said professional consequences didn't protect me from Ethan. Friday afternoon, I was at work when Nancy came to my desk looking serious. She said I had a visitor in the lobby. My stomach dropped and I asked who it was. Nancy said a woman named Amanda who said she needed to speak with me urgently. I felt rage flash through me, hot and immediate. I told Nancy I didn't want to see Amanda, that she was the receptionist who'd given my information to Ethan. Nancy said Amanda had been crying and seemed genuinely distressed. I said I didn't care, and that Amanda had put my life in danger. Nancy nodded and went back to the lobby. 5 minutes later, she returned and said Amanda had left a letter for me. I told Nancy to throw it away, but she put it on my desk anyway, saying I should at least read it before deciding. The envelope had my name written in shaky handwriting. I stared at it for 10 minutes before opening it. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten, and hard to read through the obvious tear stains. Amanda apologized repeatedly, saying she'd been stupid and careless and didn't understand the severity of what she'd done. She explained that the man who called, Ethan pretending to be David, had been charming and convincing. He'd said his sister was in an abusive relationship and needed help, that he was trying to research good therapists for her. Amanda had wanted to help someone in need and had answered his questions without thinking about patient confidentiality. She'd confirmed I was a patient after he'd asked specifically because he'd said his sister had recommended Dr. Patel. Amanda wrote that she'd only realized her mistake when Dr. Patel confronted her, that she'd been terminated immediately and reported to the licensing board. She was losing her certification and probably couldn't work in healthcare again. She understood if I hated her. She hated herself. She just wanted me to know she was sorry and that she never meant to hurt anyone. I read the letter twice and felt my anger shift into something more complicated. Amanda had been manipulated by Ethan the same way I'd been manipulated by him years ago. He was good at finding people's weaknesses, good at playing the concerned boyfriend or worried brother or whatever role he needed to get what he wanted. Amanda had been careless and violated professional ethics, but she hadn't done it maliciously. She'd been a tool Ethan used to get to me. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it recontextualized it. I folded the letter and put it in my bag. I didn't know if I'd ever respond to her, but I couldn't throw it away either. That night, I had nightmares about Ethan for the first time in months. Woke up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I checked all the locks twice, looked out the window to see if his car was in the parking lot. It wasn't. I still couldn't go back to sleep. Saturday morning, I drove to Simone's apartment and spent the day there, grateful to be somewhere that felt safe. We watched movies and ate junk food, and she didn't ask about Ethan until I brought him up. I told her about Amanda's letter, and Simone said Amanda could apologize all she wanted. She'd still destroyed my sense of safety. I agreed, but said I also understood how Ethan had manipulated her. Simone asked if I was actually considering forgiving Amanda, and I said I didn't know. Forgiveness felt impossible right now. That evening, Simone walked me to my car and waited until I was inside with the doors locked before going back to her building. I drove home the long way, watching my mirrors constantly. No silver Audi, no one following me. I got to my apartment and parked in my assigned spot. As I was getting out, a man approached from between 2 cars. Not Ethan. Someone I didn't recognize. He asked if I was Claire, and my body went into fight or flight mode. I said no and tried to get back in my car. He said he was a private investigator hired by Ethan and that Ethan wanted me to have this. He held out an envelope. I didn't take it. He set it on the hood of my car and walked away. I called 911 from inside my car with the doors locked. The police came and took the envelope as evidence. Inside was a letter from Ethan, pages and pages of him explaining how much he loved me, how he'd changed, how he was in therapy now and working on his anger issues. He said he understood why I'd left, but that I was making a mistake. We were meant to be together. He'd forgive me for the restraining order if I'd just talk to him. The letter was full of manipulative language I recognized from our relationship, the same cycles of apology and blame. The police said the private investigator's involvement was concerning, and they'd try to identify him from the parking lot cameras. They also said hiring someone to deliver a message wasn't technically a violation of the restraining order, because Ethan himself hadn't been within 500 yards of me. I asked if I was supposed to just accept this psychological torture, and one officer looked at me with genuine sympathy and said he wished he had a better answer. The system wasn't designed to protect people from this kind of sustained harassment. Sunday, I didn't leave my apartment. I ordered food delivery and watched the delivery person through the peephole before opening the door, checking to make sure it wasn't Ethan or another private investigator. Monday morning, I called Gregory and told him about the letter delivery. He was furious and said we'd file another motion, but he also warned me that the legal system was reactive, not proactive. Unless Ethan physically harmed me or made specific threats of violence, the courts had limited ability to stop him from these indirect contacts. I asked Gregory what I was supposed to do then. Just wait until Ethan escalated to actual violence? Gregory said something about considering witness protection programs for domestic violence victims, but that the waiting lists were long and the requirements strict. I thanked him and hung up feeling hopeless. I'd done everything right. Left the relationship, got a restraining order, moved away, changed jobs, went to therapy, and still Ethan found ways to terrorize me. That week, I started looking seriously at apartments in other states. Portland was too close. Seattle might work. Or maybe somewhere completely different, like Atlanta or Denver. Cities where I had no connections and Ethan would have no reason to look. But the thought of starting over again made me exhausted. I'd already rebuilt my life once. The idea of doing it a second time felt impossible. Thursday afternoon, I was at my desk when Nancy came by and asked if I had a minute. She led me to her office and closed the door. She said she'd been thinking about my situation and wanted to offer something. Her family had a vacation house in the mountains, about 3 hours away. That wasn't being used right now. I could stay there for a few weeks if I needed space to think and feel safe. No one would know where I was. I started crying right there in her office. Nancy hugged me and said she understood what it was like to be afraid, that she'd been in a similar situation years ago. I accepted her offer, and that weekend I drove to the mountain house with enough clothes and supplies for 2 weeks. The house was beautiful, isolated, surrounded by pine trees with no neighbors in sight. I spent the first 3 days just breathing, letting my nervous system calm down for the first time in weeks. Dr. Patel did phone sessions with me every other day, and we processed the trauma of the recent escalation. She said I was experiencing re-traumatization, that Ethan's campaign of harassment was triggering all the old wounds from our relationship. I told her I felt broken, and she said I wasn't broken. I was responding normally to an abnormal situation. On the 4th day, Simone drove up to visit, and we spent the afternoon on the deck, drinking wine and watching the sunset. She said Ethan had shown up at her apartment looking for me. She'd called the police immediately, and they'd arrested him for violating the restraining order since Simone's building was on the prohibited list. He'd been held for 48 hours, then released. Simone said he'd looked different when he showed up, more desperate and unhinged. She was worried about what he'd do next. I stayed at the mountain house for 12 days total. On day 13, I got a call from Gregory that changed everything. Ethan had been arrested for assault. Not against me. Against a woman he'd been dating after me. She'd filed a police report after he'd hit her during an argument, and when the police ran his record, they found the previous restraining order violations and the assault history with me. The prosecutor was building a case for domestic violence with pattern evidence and wanted me to testify. I said yes immediately. Gregory warned me that testifying meant facing Ethan in court, that his lawyer would cross-examine me and try to discredit my story. I said I didn't care. If there was a chance to put him in prison where he couldn't hurt me or anyone else, I'd take it. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out. I drove back to my apartment that night feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The possibility that the system might finally work. The next 6 weeks were preparation. Gregory connected me with the prosecutor, a woman named Diana Ortiz who specialized in domestic violence cases. Diana interviewed me for hours, going through every incident from my relationship with Ethan, every hospital visit, every police call, every restraining order violation. She was building a pattern of behavior that would show the court Ethan was a serial abuser who escalated over time. Diana also brought in the other victim, a woman named Rachel who was 23 and looked terrified. We met once, briefly, and didn't talk about details. Just sat in the same room and acknowledged that we'd both survived the same man. Diana said Rachel's testimony combined with mine would be powerful. 2 victims, similar patterns, undeniable evidence. On the day of the trial, I wore a professional dress and arrived early. Ethan was already there with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who specialized in defending men accused of domestic violence. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on day 2, and the prosecutor walked me through every incident methodically. The first time Ethan had pushed me. The escalation to hitting. The night he'd broken my ribs and I'd ended up in the hospital. The stalking after I left. The restraining order violations. The therapy office parking lot. All of it. Ethan's lawyer cross-examined me aggressively, asking why I'd stayed if things were so bad, suggesting I was exaggerating for sympathy, implying I was mentally unstable. Diana objected to most of it, and the judge sustained her objections, but the damage was done. The defense's strategy was clear: paint me as a hysterical ex-girlfriend making up stories for attention. Rachel testified on day 3 and told a nearly identical story about her relationship with Ethan. The first months of charm and romance, then the gradual isolation, then the control, then the violence. The defense tried the same tactics with her, but the parallel narratives were too strong to dismiss. When both of us were telling the same story about the same patterns, it was hard to claim we were both lying. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict: guilty on all charges, including assault, battery, stalking, and multiple restraining order violations. The judge sentenced Ethan to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years probation, with mandatory anger management and domestic violence intervention programs. As they led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Ethan looked at me one last time. Not angry anymore, just empty. Like he'd finally realized he'd lost control and didn't know how to process it. I didn't feel triumphant or relieved. I felt tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting for years to be believed, to be protected, to be safe. Diana walked me out of the courthouse and told me I'd been incredibly brave. I thanked her, but said I didn't feel brave. I felt like I'd survived something that never should have happened in the first place. That evening, I met Simone for dinner, and we didn't talk about the trial. We talked about normal things, about her job and her new boyfriend and the vacation she was planning. When I got home to my apartment, I looked around at the space I'd created for myself after leaving Ethan. The furniture I'd picked out, the art on the walls, the books on the shelves. This was my life now. Not defined by him anymore, not shaped by fear. I thought about Amanda and her letter and realized I'd never responded. I pulled out a piece of paper and wrote a short note. I told her I understood how Ethan had manipulated her, that I didn't forgive her, but I didn't hate her either. What she'd done had consequences, but it didn't make her a bad person. Just a careless one who'd learned a terrible lesson. I mailed the letter the next day and felt lighter. 3 years passed. Ethan was in prison. I stayed in therapy with Dr. Patel, processing not just the relationship trauma, but the aftermath, the stalking, the violation of having my safe space compromised. The practice had completely overhauled their privacy protocols, and Dr. Patel told me she thought about what happened every time she trained new staff. She made sure everyone understood that patient confidentiality wasn't just about rules, it was about safety. About life and death sometimes. I slowly rebuilt my sense of security. Started going to the gym again, started dating cautiously, started believing that maybe I could have a normal life. When Ethan's release date approached, Diana contacted me to discuss probation conditions. I requested that the no-contact order remain permanent, and the judge agreed. Ethan would never be allowed to contact me again, not through any means, for the rest of my life. Diana said if he tried, he'd go back to prison immediately. That permanent order felt like the closure I'd been missing. The final proof that the system, despite all its failures and delays, had eventually protected me. It just shouldn't have taken years and multiple victims to get there. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.